I'm going to start by laying it all out. You ready? Democracy is made up. I'll say that again. Democracy is made up. Democracies, monarchies, communist states, all forms of government are all just conceptions of the human imagination. Our system of government was designed, like the Rubik's Cube or the telephone or any other product, service, or system we know today. Governments are just experiments in figuring out how to use rules and principles to organize people so that we can benefit from being part of a collective and so that we don't devolve into warring factions, at least all of the time. But at some point, all of these forms of government, in fact, all of our social systems, they didn't exist until someone thought them up. They didn't exist until someone imagined them. Our system of democracy, our philosophy of democracy, didn't exist until the ancient Greeks, until this gentleman, Cleisthenes, thought it up. So if this whole thing, democracy, is made up, we're all on the same page about that? Yeah. Well, then let's see exactly what we created. So democracy, this made-up philosophy of government, rests on three key principles: liberty, justice, and equality. In the US, to help us live out these principles, our founding fathers created a system of rules and institutions to help us live out this practice. It was to help us make decisions, distribute power, and protect us against tyranny. We know these things today as how a bill becomes a law, our process of elections, and how our president becomes into power. But here's the thing. Those founders, they created this system from their point of view. And as you can see, that was a very white, very male, very Christian, and very wealthy point of view. They didn't know, or in reality, they probably didn't care that the system of governance, this practice of democracy that they were designing, was heavily biased by their conception of power. An ingrained belief in patriarchal, Anglo-European, and Christian values. They were crafting a system of democracy, yes, that was built on those fundamental principles of liberty, justice, and equality. But they were also designing a system that perpetuated this ideology of power. The system they designed was, and still is today, biased. Let me show you what I mean. In 1789, George Washington was elected. In that election, only 6% of the population could vote. 6%. There's about 100 of us here. Look around. If this was 1789, 6 of you could vote. And, by the way, you'd have to be white, you'd have to be male, and you would have to own land. How many of you live in New York City? Okay, almost all of you. Well, you know as well as I that it is so hard to own property in New York City, so I don't know if any of us would have qualified to actually vote. So over the next 250 years, as those in power expanded their definition of human to include women, to include persons of color, to include queer persons, they slowly eked out rights to these groups. And that began with the right to citizenship, the right to vote, the right to access education, the right to not be discriminated against for your race or religion. But you can think of these founders like quilt makers. They were crafting this epic quilt, right? This quilt of modern democracy. But they were the crafters. They manifested its design to suit them and anyone else that looked or was like them. Anyone else outside of that system wasn't included or incorporated in its design. And they certainly weren't given any authority to help craft it. So over time, as these rights expanded, we were creating more access and opportunity. And you could look at this list and say, okay, all right, so sure, they made this design in their image, but look at how much we've done. We're expanding access, we're creating change. And you're right, this is a pretty long list. We have made change. But I look at this system of piece by piece tacking on rights as just more evidence of our system's flaw. Because if this process of progress, this piece by piece process of expanding rights was working, then why are so many individuals still fighting for equality? We had an abolitionist movement, and then a whole civil war, and then a civil rights movement in the 1960s, but yet we still need a modern civil rights movement in Black Lives Matter because persons of color in this country don't have the rights or opportunities that they deserve as humans in our society. We have had 2 women's liberations movements, 2, and yet we still needed a women's march just this past year where millions of people, men and women, marched in 653 cities across the country because sexism still oppresses all of us. And women still don't have the rights or opportunities that they deserve as people in this country. When those in power still control what gets added to our quilt, we will never create a more just and equal society. When those in power still control what its design is, rather than inviting all of us to create a more colorful quilt, we won't achieve progress. We'll continue this process of progress that looks like progress, but in fact fails millions of people over and over again. We need to create a new way in which we're redefining power, in which we're creating progress, in which we're moving forward to address a fundamental flaw in our system. What I want to see, and what I know is possible, is a reimagining of our ideology of power. I want to see an ideology that's rooted in the fundamentals of our humanity, not our race, not our religion, not our sexuality, not our gender, not anything else that others us. To be fair, it's not that those markers don't exist. It's just that, in my opinion, in the practice of a modern democracy, those markers shouldn't generate different levels of value for people. This is the point at which I'm sure several of you are thinking, that sounds great, super idealistic, never gonna happen, change is hard. And you're right, change is really hard. We're humans, we don't like change. And changing something as fundamental as this bias that's been in our system for centuries is even harder. But I know that change is possible because we have done all this. I know that change is possible because I wouldn't be standing on this stage if it wasn't. So if our goal is a reimagining of our ideology of power, how do we start? Well, we actually start in the same way the ancient Greeks did. We start by experimenting. We start by imagining. We practice by designing experiences where we get to see and feel and understand our humanity in a new way. We prototype by designing new systems together with those most underserved and underrepresented in our existing systems today. An example I'm really proud of is an experience I designed late last year with my creative partner, Alex Tadero, at Median. We designed an interactive dining experience where we enabled participants to understand the decisions and emotions that immigrants, average citizens, and political representatives experience when they interact. The outcome was really powerful. Participants who typically held positions of privilege in our existing systems shared that for the first time, they understood what it felt like to be outside of it. Another example that's happening on the global political stage is a group called Democracy Earth. Democracy Earth started out as a political party in Argentina that was trying to use blockchain technology to enable more participants to participate in policy decisions. Today, they are a Y Combinator-backed nonprofit that is seeking to build a platform to support this thing that they call liquid democracy. It's a combination of direct democracy and representative democracy that they really hope spreads throughout the world. They are creating a new system that disrupts our traditional notions of power so that the most underrepresented and underserved individual can have a meaningful voice in the practice of democracy. Now, you might be sitting here thinking, amazing, I'm not a part of any of these things, I don't know how to design a dinner. I'm sure you all do, though. How can I contribute to making change? Well, there's actually a lot that you as individuals can do. You can start by doing two things. First, start doing the personal work to become a modern, democratic citizen. Get comfortable with ambiguity and realize that multiple perspectives can be valid, not just your own. In this new world of power and collective experience, you might experience some things that are maybe uncomfortable or unfamiliar. I encourage you to lean into that discomfort. Acknowledge and recognize when your biases crop up and learn from them. 2, connect with someone who is different from you. Start by talking to someone in your own community. Start by actively listening to them and understanding and hearing their story. Try to learn something new about them that you've never before heard. And seek to understand what the world looks like through their eyes. The larger point is this. If this whole thing is made up, we have so much more capacity to create change than we think. If this whole thing is made up, our system of government, our ideology of power, then let's make something new together. Thank you.